us on to our final presentation today. Last but by no means least, it's Mark Towens from the Portland Authority. Mark is the PLA Harbour Master Upper, and he has navigation responsibility for the tidal Thames between Tennyson Lock and Crossness in the east. Over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Ed. And perhaps the purpose of my presentation is going to be showing you that the Thames isn't the most dangerous from the river. Well, the answer, not surprisingly, was everyone wants more of everything. The cargo handlers would like more tonnage and more ships. The inland waterway operators want to be transporting more tonnage on the waterways. The passenger boat operators would love to be carrying more passengers, and everyone else would like to be doing more sport and recreation on the river. So we have four priority actions really look at the navigational side of things. To grow the port from 50 million tonnes this year to 60 to 80 million tonnes. Increase freight, double freight up to 4 million tonnes per year, excluding some of the big projects that you guys are clearly involved with. Increasing passenger numbers from 10.6 million tonnes, 10.6 million this year, up to 20 million by 2035. And then obviously increasing sport and recreation. For people that don't know, things like the Oxford and Cambridge University boat race takes place on the Thames. It is the home to British rowing. So we've got a situation where, as a port authority, we're already one of the biggest in the UK, and in terms of the inland waterway side of things, in terms of passenger boats and movements of freight, we're the largest by a long, long way compared with any other waterway in the UK. The numbers of passengers and freight, you don't get anywhere near that anywhere else in the UK. But obviously we have this ambition and vision to grow, which is supported by all the various stakeholders that use the river. And from a PLA perspective, that means that we really had to look again at what we were doing, because we need to try and ensure as an organisation we're prepared and ready to handle these increases. And I think Jay rightly said, we do have a few incidents every now and again. Generally, we have a good safety record. And if you want to grow things, but just to maintain the status quo, you've got to be doing better. But if you actually want to improve on your incident records, you've got to work doubly hard. So it was important that we looked at ourselves as an organisation and looked at how we can manage things better. So we've come up with this sort of strategy of protect, improve, promote, which is up there in the top. And we're very much going to be focusing on the protect side of things, which is protecting effectively the safety, property, and the environment of the Thames. Improvement for us is about developing new infrastructure to promote growth and opportunity, and then obviously promotion is self-explanatory, telling people like yourselves about all the things that happen on the Thames. What we hope is that improves our competitiveness and sustainability, which leads to growth, which leads to more revenue, more resources, greater influence, which allows us to do more on the protect, improve, promote. So sort of a virtuous circle that keeps going round. But touching on really zero harm, what is it? It's obviously very popular these days. There are many large projects promoting zero harm. There's quite a few that have had zero harm and decided not to do it anymore. But for us, we've tried to take a pragmatic view as to what zero harm is, so that it's actually something meaningful for us. For us, it is fundamentally a target. It's something to aim for. And if you haven't got a target, where realistically are you going? For us, we see that as an elimination of serious and serious incidents, which we use the definitions of the MAIB. So many of the examples of the videos you've seen would be classed, not surprisingly, as serious, very serious incidents, and they're the ones that we want to remove. We are sensible enough to know that we won't reduce every single incident that happens on the river. With the number of movements that you saw from Andrew's slide, I think I saw something like 135,000 was one of the numbers. Unfortunately, think of 135,000 car movements, you're going to bump someone at some point. But the other element of zero harm for us is taking safety further than the water's edge. We've been very much focused in the past on the Thames, on the water side of things, but what we want to do is actually start to look a little bit further than that. Where else is the harm coming? And I've got a slide a little bit later to cover one of the areas that we're looking at. So how are we going to achieve zero harm? Well, we've got the two sides of the coin, and I think it's already been touched on already quite a bit, the proactive side and the reactive side, and clearly we're going to be focusing on the proactive side. We don't want to be tidying up after incidents, we want to be trying to make sure they don't happen in the first place. And what I've sought to do with this presentation is touch on a few of the key areas that we're working on at the moment to give you a bit of a sense of what that work entails. But the first thing from our point of view is we need to make sure that we look at ourselves, and it's going back to the first slide about we have this Thames vision. What do we do to make sure that we're doing things right as well? It's okay sitting there, we could easily go out there and create lots of new rules and regulations and blame everybody else, but actually we need to look at ourselves and see what can we do to make things better. First one is a red tape challenge. For anyone that's dealt with the PLA before, you'll know, a few chuckles, outrageous. You'll know that we have the odd rule and regulation. In fact, we have 23 books full of them in different guises, whether that's bylaws, general directions, permanent notice to mariners, codes of practice, you name it, we have it. We sometimes struggle with trying to find the right regulation, and so we understand the situation for other people. So we've been going through a red tape challenge this year, and at the moment we've reduced the word count of our regulations by 48.1%. We're not finished yet, and it's inevitably going to change, but a near 50% reduction in our regulations, which we hope doesn't materially change safety, of course, which is the purpose, is a good step forward, and everyone more sensibly understanding our regulations can only help with getting the safety messages out there. And the other thing we felt we needed to do was to really look at our frontline services, those people that interact with river users day to day. And for us, the two big ones are the picture on the left there, our vessel traffic service, which if you don't know what that is, it's like air traffic control but a lot slower, and our harbour service launches. So we have 3 patrol launches out there patrolling the river, and what we really want from both of them is engagement with stakeholders, whether that's to pick someone up if they're doing something wrong before the accident occurs, offering advice, education, talking to people, finding out what people's concerns are, imparting information back to us in the management team to sit there and, if they keep reporting certain types of problems are happening, that's great, because then we can start to think about what are we going to do about it before it becomes a problem. So these are the areas that we've been focusing on over the last year to really try to make improvements in these areas. The other thing for us to do is to focus on key risks. So one of the key pieces of work we did for the Thames Vision was the Central London Capacity Study, and this very much follows on from the work that Andrew was talking about earlier, using the Thames traffic model. And the picture you can see there is sort of the final iteration, which is using the Thames traffic model and causation factor, I think.
Actually, yes, yeah.
Yeah, excellent. Causation factor, thank you, to determine total risk within the Central London area. And you can see the red there highlighted just over here, which is near to Tower Pier, that's HMS Belfast, has the highest risk. And we sought to try and answer the questions, are we already at capacity? How can we improve safety? Can we make safety improvements to continue allow an increase in capacity? Well, the answer to that was, are we already at capacity? At times, yes, but they're very short periods of time. How can we improve safety? Well, I'll come to that in a moment. And can safety improvements allow an increase in capacity? And part of the work with the Thames traffic model was to look at different ideas, different mitigation measures, and try to quantify the level of improvement that we could gain from that. And even try to look at, okay, well, how many sort of additional Class 5 passenger boats does that mean? And the capacity study recommendations, I'm only going to touch on a few of them. There was about 20 in total, but I've wanted to focus on a few which I thought were pertinent to what we're talking about today. First one is create more space. So Central London, if any of you have ever walked alongside the riverside, you've got bridges everywhere, you've got piers everywhere, and you've got mooring barges everywhere. If you want to try and squeeze more into a finite space, one of the things to do is to try and create more space. And by removing some of the infrastructure and pushing it to areas which are less congested, we can try and make more space, reduce traffic density, and hopefully improve safety. And we also need to make sure that new infrastructure, which is going to be needed to support the growth, is appropriate, and I'm going to come back to that on another slide. We wanted to promote a change in freight operations. I think it was Ian there that showed you a picture of a Corrie tug with 3 barges behind it. Well, actually, we much prefer this type of arrangement with a pusher tug behind a barge which has got much more control, is more fuel efficient, and is fundamentally a safer operation. And we've changed our regulations to sort of drive operators to this way, which they want to go anyway, as a safer way of moving material up and down the river. And we've got most of the operators for Tideway, as there's many of you already in the room, you will know, or maybe should know, that most of your operators are going this way and moving barges in this manner. The other point we wanted to do is look at improved water space management. This diagram here is an excerpt from our Passenger Vessel Code of Practice, yet another one of those documents. And we looked at things like recommended waiting areas, here and here, no waiting zones in the middle, to try and improve traffic flow around the pinch points. Of course, we identified Tower Pier as one of the busiest areas, and we wanted to try and undertake that water space management around the piers, trying to again make everything flow easier. I've got to try and work out how this works now. I'm going to show you a quick video now. No? How do you do it? It will just play, will it? Does the man do it behind? Do we have to talk loudly? Shall I press next again? Both together, perhaps?
Might just be worth knocking on the door.
Can't get it to go.
It won't go.
No, I've been trying to hit the play button, there's no play button there. There's nothing there to play.
Okay, I'm going to talk about it then. So that one won't work. Hopefully some of the others will work. This one is quite a big video, so that might be the issue. So one of the items that came out from the capacity study, which this video would have demonstrated really well, is the timetables of many of the passenger boat services mean that the passenger boat operators, they like, from a customer perspective, if their boats leave at 11 o'clock, it's much easier than 17 minutes past for people to remember. So they all like to depart at the likes of 11 o'clock, 11:30, 12 o'clock, because from a customer perspective, that makes more sense. The problem we have is, as an example, at Westminster Pier, there's 4 boats which depart Westminster Pier at 11 o'clock, and there's 4 new boats arriving ready to go onto the pier at the same time, which causes unnecessary conflict and bunching in the area. What this video was going to demonstrate is, and I'll just talk you around it, this is obviously a typical situation here with sort of a relatively low number of vessels navigating within this section of the river between Waterloo Bridge here and Blackfriars Bridge here. What it would have shown, if we could have operated it, was that as the time progressed along this, you suddenly had from this area a sudden group of passenger vessels departing Westminster Pier at the same time that an inbound tug and tow was coming this way. This large grouping of vessels led to significant bunching of traffic, and while it wasn't a main factor in an incident, it was a contributory factor to one of the passenger vessels suffering from the effects of interaction from all these boats in this area and actually having a collision with the inbound tug and tow. So it's quite a serious incident, but it's a good example of how that bunching can create problems and why we're keen to undertake a review of timetables to try and spread these sorts of issues out. So coming on for some things that will very much sit with you guys. Obviously, we need to look at achieving growth and in trying to achieve this forecast growth in both passengers and freight within sort of the London part of the Thames is going to require new infrastructure in certain places. But it's important that we get that infrastructure right. And what I've offered here is 2 examples which don't. Obviously, this particular delight, as well as this one, and obviously with the discussions we've been having about impact protection, this one obviously presents quite a number of challenges. So it's really important when we're looking at new infrastructure that it's been assessed correctly. And by that, we're talking about a navigational risk assessment, looking at how the boats are likely to move around such a thing. So we want to make sure it's correctly positioned. And touching on some of the other presentations we've already had, we want to ensure that it's resistant to realistic impacts. Well, what are those realistic impacts? Well, to do that, you need to do the navigational risk assessment to understand what the boats are moving in the area, how they move and how they might likely impact your structure. And going through that process then identifies the appropriate level of impact protection, what that should be. I think, I can't remember which one it was that we looked at, where the ship's bow went over the top at the Skyway Bridge. And I think that's an excellent example of, while that bridge might have had impact protection, it certainly wasn't designed correctly to allow the bow of the ship to go over the top and take out the bridge pier. So it's very important that the impact protection suits the type of vessels that we have. We also want to look at new infrastructure in terms for its intended purpose. So we had a presentation there on new piers, and for us, the new pier is really important where it's positioned, but what's also really important, is it going to be a traditional passenger boat terminal? Is it going to be used for tugs and tows? Is it going to be used for the river bus services? And how is that new service going to impact on everyone else? You can put a new pier in, but if you position it in the wrong place, you're going to drive the vessels to navigate in a way that's not optimised. It's not as safe as it could be. So it's really important to look at the intended use and make sure that's factored into the design and the location. And then finally, and it is a bit of a difficult one, to look at how can you future-proof the design? How can you make sure that it's not just okay for now, but it's also okay for the future? Because we want to make sure, as things develop and technologies develop, as much as possible, as much as we can see, that infrastructure that's going in now is actually going to be fit for purpose for the coming years. I said I was going to touch on some of the work that we're doing slightly wider than just on the water. And suicide prevention is one of those. We've teamed up with other regulators, such as the Met Police and the like, the RNLI, the Coast Guard, to create a Thames Water Safety Forum. And we have a commitment that we're working on a strategy for to reduce the number of deaths on the river by 10% year on year. Currently, there is very sadly 35 deaths per year associated with the Thames. And from those, virtually, the vast majority, unfortunately, are people who choose to commit suicide from the bridges and riverside. And while we have an excellent response rate, 30% of those people who jump don't survive the jump. We've even had unfortunate situations where a lifeboat has been sat literally underneath the chap as he's jumped, gone into the water and doesn't surface. Such is the tidal flows and the eddies within those flows. It is particularly treacherous. So we are looking at that in particular. And there are many successes around the world where other countries or other cities have looked to tackle this problem. There's two examples there: the Clifton Suspension Bridge, which saw a 50% reduction in suicide attempts after the installation of barriers, and the Munster Terrace in Bern, which saw a suicide rate drop to 0 after installing nets. So from our point of view, at 35 deaths per year, we see it as that's something we really need to look at. That's a lot of people, unfortunately, dying per year that could be prevented with sensible measures. So for future projects, we are very much looking at suicide prevention strategies to be incorporated into that, to make sure that items in the river are designed to minimise the risk from suicide. And just a quick photo there, that's the nets you can see here on the Munster Terrace in Bern that's been particularly effective. So I'm going to talk quickly about assessing new operations and a case study here of a new bridge and the process that we went through, which started off with a thorough assessment of risk in terms of navigation, the tug operators, the pilots, the ships themselves, the berth operators, the Results Harbour Masters, VTS staff, looking at the risk and assessing it. We used, in this case, extensive simulation and modelling. We have a ship simulator similar to some of the photos you've already seen. We spent 6 days trying different methodologies to try and get the right way of navigating. We set limitations and procedures to guide operations in line with those risk assessments. This is a process that went over about 6 months or so. And then we ensured that all of our pilots went through significant training in our simulator prior to taking this new larger ship up through. We'd had a number of successful transits, and we'd gone through what we were content with was an extremely thorough process. In fact, from a PLA point of view, we had never been through such a thorough process to make sure that we were content to have this type of ship coming into central London, and we'd had about 3 successful visits. But unfortunately, no matter how much you do, not everything goes according to plan, and I'm really hopeful this video is going to work. It's not looking promising, is it?
Knock on his door.
I suspect he's pressing the button. No?
Sorry. Up there. Nothing here.
Okay. Well, I can only apologise, I'm sorry. What you would have seen in this particular case was a view from a CCTV camera on the Thames barrier with the cruise ship inward bound and unfortunately just clipping the Thames barrier as it went through, causing some minor indentation of the shell plating. Obviously, from our point of view, that was significant. It was a cruise ship, it was a large ship, and the Thames barrier is a piece of critical national infrastructure. The two coming together is not what we're looking to achieve, and especially with the amount of work that we'd undertaken. So from our point of view, post-incident response, I was there within a matter of hours, post-incident debrief and interviews on board. The incident occurred on the Friday. On the Monday, we were back in the simulator with a captain from the cruise company and the pilots involved in the incident, rerunning the incident over and over again in the simulator to see what went wrong. And through that process again, we undertook we developed a revised methodology, reducing the speed of the transit, looking at the pilot positioning as we went through, and then trained the pilots in a revised methodology. And the point I'm sort of raising here is to look at really the reactive side. We talked a lot earlier about the proactive side, but it's making sure that you've got a really robust reactive approach when an incident does occur, to make sure that you really get to the bottom of what went wrong and try and prevent it happening again. And we've had another 2 successful transits since this incident, and everyone's been actually much happier with the methodology that's come out of this. So while it's unfortunate we had an incident, it did drive us to a better route in the end. We have another video that inevitably won't work to show you. We'll just pause for a moment before I'll just skip on. No, so move on. This one is a fascinating video of it's actually of a passenger boat, and the title, Difficult to Account for All Situation, it's an interesting video of a passenger boat steaming straight into the river wall at the Houses of Parliament. No mechanical failures, no problems whatsoever. What we believe happened is the chap fell asleep at the wheel. So, how do you account for something like that? It's very difficult from a Port Authority perspective to deal with. So, I think my final slide, or I might have one afterwards. How are we doing so far in terms of our target of zero harm? We can see here for 2015 our target was to reduce our incidents to here, 36. We actually achieved, this is serious and very serious incidents, we actually achieved 13, which we massively overplayed it and made life difficult for ourselves afterwards. But it was a significant improvement in 2015, doing a lot of extra work. In 2016, we had a target of 11.7 incidents, we'll call it 12, and we achieved 10 incidents, so 23% reduction on what we were looking for. So it is working. 2017, target of 9 incidents. I don't know the exact figures, but we're not too far away from 9. But having got through the summer season, we're expecting to be about on target for what we're looking to achieve in 2017. So we have got progress in these areas, and the plan is sort of showing it's starting to work. So a few takeaway points. For us, zero harm is a target, but the focus needs to be on achieving annual objectives, small annual objectives that keep you looking at and keeps you enthused as you meet those targets and keep working. Proactive management is the key to reducing incidents, but when it goes wrong, thorough investigation is necessary to make sure that you get to the root cause of the incident. New infrastructure must be designed to minimise impact, but needs to be resistant to realistic impacts. I think, as we've seen before, and as you've realised, an object will get struck by a vessel at some point. And as someone said to me once, driving boats is a contact sport. You do come alongside piers. That is part of what you do. So it will get bumped every now and again. It needs to be resistant to realistic impacts. And new infrastructure also needs to consider the wider issues such as suicide prevention, sighting, and the other bits and pieces that we've talked about. That's it. from me. I can only apologise that none of my videos worked, but we'll see if we can't do something and send them round afterwards. Thank you.